All right. Go ahead.
Okay,
You're rolling.
Today is April 18th, 2024. I am interviewing Bernard Salfas. My name is Etty Zilber. We are conducting this interview in Tucson, Arizona, in English.
Perfect. All right. Camera is speeding, audio is speeding, and we can get started. All right. Take it away.
Good morning, Bernard.
Good morning,
Thank you so much for sharing your testimony with us. Would you please state your name and spell it?
My name is Bernard Salfas, Bernard, Salfas, Salfas.
What was your name at birth, and could you please spell the name?
Okay, my name at birth was Bernard, but Kantorowicz, Kantorowicz.
Could you tell us the reason for the difference in your name?
Basically, as we'll find out later on in my story, my aunt adopted us and gave us their name, which were at the time Salkfus, with a C in the middle, and which eventually I took out to make it easier to pronounce.
Okay. Did you ever have a Hebrew name?
Not that I know of. I think it was Dove, D-O-V.
Dov, okay. When were you born?
November 14th, 1932.
And what is your age today?
91.
In what city and what country were you born?
I was born in Warsaw, Poland.
Now, you were born in Warsaw, but your family migrated. Could you tell us to where they migrated and why?
Well, I can tell you where, because that's where I ended up, and that's Paris, France. The why is a question mark, but I have to assume that my father was looking for a better business opportunity, being in the millinery trade. He was making ladies' hats. And so I suppose that was the major reason. The other possible reason, when I was born, was right after the Depression, and I believe there was a certain amount of anti-Semitism in Poland starting up. So that's my take on this.
Okay. Could you please state the name of your father?
My father's name was Chaim, Chaim, and when he came to France, it became Charles.
And he was Kantorowicz.
And he was Kantorowicz, yes.
Now, where was your father born?
He was born in Poland, also in Warsaw.
Okay. Could you tell us about the educational level of your father? What level did he acquire?
I have absolutely no idea about my father's background, especially his education. I was told at one point that he was in the army, the Polish army, but beyond that, I just don't know.
Okay. Could you describe your paternal grandparents' names?
No.
Not at all.
Not at all.
But were their nationality, they were also Polish?
I would assume so.
Okay. And their religious affiliation was?
Jewish.
Could you please tell us your mother's name, including her maiden name?
My mother's name was Pessa, P-E-S-S-A. Her maiden name was Mendelssohn, M-E-N-D-E-L-S-O-H-N.
And where was she born?
She was born in Poland also.
And did she go to school? Did she have any kind of education?
Here again, I'm sorry, but I just don't know.
And her ethnicity and her religious background was?
She was Jewish, same as the whole family.
And did she have an occupation?
Not that I know of. She, of course, was a homemaker. And I know that when we moved to Paris, she helped my father in his hat making.
Now, what are your most vivid memories of your father?
My father had a temper. He screamed a lot, especially when things didn't go well with the factory, with the fabrication of hats. So I don't have much of a good feeling for he was my father, but all I remember was he was contrary. I can't hear you.
Tell us a little bit about your vivid memories of your mother.
My mother was a very kind woman. I have very loving feelings for her. I believe she's the one who took care of me, at least when I needed it. I know she took us to the park and fed us and made dinners. And so I have, I would say, fond memories of my mother.
Okay, now what about your mother's parents, your maternal grandparents? What were their names?
Their name was Moshe, and his wife was Chaya, C-H-A-I, Sloves, S-L-O-V-E-S. And they, well, later on, or now I can tell you, they eventually ended up in the United States also, back in the 30s.
Your maternal grandparents went
Yes.
to the States.
Yes.
And what languages did they speak at home?
My parents?
Your parents with your grandparents?
Well, I don't remember my grandparents at home, okay? But in our home, between my mother and father, it was mostly Polish when they didn't want us to understand them. Otherwise, it was mostly Yiddish and some French. Of course, we kids spoke French all the time. And I really don't know at this point the degree of French that my parents spoke, you know, because they had just arrived. So may not have been the best of French, but but Yiddish was the common language.
Okay. Now tell us about your siblings. How many siblings did you have? Do you have?
I had two brothers. My older brother, Jerry, who was actually born a year before I, because he is the result of my father and his first wife, who was my wife's sister. And my mother's sister. She died in childbirth and married the sister. And I was the firstborn from my mother and his second wife.
Uh-huh.
Understand?
And yes, so your older brother is the son of your father with the sister of your mother.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I mean,
uh-huh.
I never knew this until when I came to the United States, and later on I was told that this is what happened. And my brother didn't take it well. He said he didn't believe it. And that was the end of that. There was no more discussion about it.
Mm-hmm. And you have a younger brother
I
as
have
well.
a younger brother, Maurice. He was born in Paris in 1937.
And by being born in Paris, he was a French citizen?
Technically, he should have been, but not according to the Germans. Because when it came to all the problems, they considered him more Jewish than French.
Could you tell us a little bit about your older brother and your younger brother?
Well, I was much closer to my younger brother because it seems that from the day he was born, I kind of took care of him, you know, and my older brother didn't. And even though during the war, we were closer than with my older brother. Why, I don't know. But my older brother was, how should I put it? He didn't really want much of an education, or at least wasn't directed in that area. So he really didn't do very much beyond the normal schooling when eventually he came to the United States. And I would say the same happened to my younger brother. But anyhow, that would be further on in the story.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of anyone else in your household, like another relative, household help, grandparents in your home?
No, there was nobody else living with us that I recall in Paris.
Okay, so a little more about your memories from home. Do you recall family dinners, holidays, Shabbat, anything like that? Tell us a little bit about that.
I don't remember much about so-called family dinners. I know that my mother and father had a lot of friends in Paris, and we always had people in the house, not relatives, but mostly friends that either they knew from before or they acquired while they were in Paris. And
mhm.
that having a network of friends, as we'll find out, became very important eventually.
And did you celebrate holidays at home? Do you recall Shabbat
No.
or
No, we were,
Passover, any holidays?
I don't remember. We were not religious. I know that. I don't remember, for example, going to temple while I was a child. And
Okay. Now let's switch to school and your schooling. Tell us about the kind of school you went to. What kind of an education did you have there?
You're talking about back in Paris?
Yes, we're still in Paris. Yep.
Well, in Paris, I went to public school. I don't quite remember it, but I know I did go to school. And of course, I left Paris in 1943 for good, but I stopped going to school in probably 1941. So at that point, I was 9 years old.
So when you stopped going to school, that was because of the Nazi regulations,
Right.
Is that right?
It became too dangerous because having to wear a Star of David, you became kind of a target, and the Germans could pick you up at any time. So somebody decided just about 1941 that we better stop school, and that's what we did. But it's not just stopping school, because at that point, we didn't live, for the most part, in our apartment in Paris, at least the kids. We were sent out to various places to be safer.
Okay, we'll get to that information in a moment. So during the time you were in school, do you recall what you studied? Do you recall your friends from school?
Not at all. It's a total blank.
You don't recall having any kind of problems in school because you were Jewish?
No, the only thing I remember is walking away from school one day with the Star of David and kids making fun of it. That's all I do remember.
Okay. So you don't recall you didn't have any best friend at school that you recall?
No.
Okay. You said your family was not religious, but did they belong to any kind of Jewish community?
Not that I know of.
So the anti-Semitism that you yourself actually felt was, as you described, walking with the yellow star. Do you recall any other anti-Semitic acts during that time?
No. In fact, I can talk about anti-Semitism today, and of course, I know what it is. I don't think I really appreciated what it was then, at 8 years old, or 9.
Do you recall any tension or stress at home from your parents because of the situation?
No, the stress came in later when the German and French police started knocking on the door.
Uh-huh. Do you recall your parents listening to the radio at all?
No.
So tell us a little bit about what were the first signs of danger for you and your family after the Nazis came into France.
Well, the first, most vivid memory was being at home one afternoon, and there was a knock on the door, and it must have been sometimes in 1941, and our parents shooed us into the room and said, hide, you know, and where they put us in hiding was on a rooftop. So we walked off the apartment onto a roof because somehow they felt that it wasn't a normal knock, and they may have said, this is the police, you know. So we went on the roof, and I think we stayed there for about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, and I heard voices. And after a while, our parents came out and said, you can come out now. And the police had left. So that was the real first sign of danger. And
did they explain to you what happened?
I just don't remember what they explained or whether I questioned it. I think we thought it was kind of a game. You know, I don't think we appreciated the severity of the situation, you know, until later on when we had to leave home for good, and we came back only once and stayed maybe a couple of weeks and then went out again.
So now you mentioned going out. Could you tell us what you meant by going out?
Well, actually, we didn't go out ourselves, but we were taken by certain people to a safer place. It was either to a farm nearby Paris or to an apartment. And I would say on the average, we stayed in one place maybe a month. And after which we were told we were making too much noise and it could become dangerous. So we were moved to another place. And this went on for, I would say, almost a year. And for a while, we came back home. They thought things would quiet down. And it really didn't, but my father was concerned. He had to stop working because they wouldn't let him work. It was one of the regulations that they prevented Jewish people from earning a living, you know. So we came back home and then went out again. So it was until the point where we just didn't come back, you know.
So when you were out in these homes, you still had contact with your parents?
Yes.
Okay.
I had contact with my parents, and there were some cousins in Paris, and they came to visit us and tell us what's going on. And they were not subject to any problems because they were true French citizens, you know, with papers and everything, and the Germans wouldn't touch them.
Okay, so the reason that the Nazis were coming and knocked on your doors because you were actually foreigners, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Now you said we were taken. Can you tell us who were the we? Who took you?
I couldn't identify, Sometimes it was a couple of women, sometimes it was a man. But our parents told us to go with these people, that it would be safe and we'll be home soon. Of course, that really never happened. But no, I couldn't tell you who these people were. You know, we didn't question it. Our parents said, you have to go, and we went.
And in retrospect now, do you know who these people were? Were they just individuals or part of a group?
Part of a group. And they were, I mean, I find out now they were organized groups for the sole purpose of saving children.
And when you were taken to these different places, these were ordinary families, ordinary citizens who took you in, non-Jewish citizens?
I would say mostly non-Jewish. One time we were on a farm, and I don't think the people were Jewish. But, you know, we just went where they took us. I mean, we were only children.
Yeah.
So we didn't question it. And that's where it was.
Yeah. So now, did you know what happened to your father or your mother while they were still back in Paris and you were outside of Paris?
No. No, I didn't know what happened to my parents until I got to Switzerland.
Okay. So now, what do you know about what happened to your father during that period of time?
Well, I'd rather start with my mother.
Okay.
She was, well, what happened was my father had what they call a rheumatic heart, whatever that might mean. But he was getting, I guess, periodic heart failure. And he was under the care of a doctor, a friendly doctor. And so what used to happen is when the German or the French police knocked on the door, my mother immediately called the doctor who lived nearby, and he came running over. And for several times, they wouldn't take my father because he was supposedly sick and there was a doctor there to testify, you know, to be there. But we were not in the apartment, but in 1942, they had a, what they call a roundup, you know, of Jewish people in Paris. And they took my mother one night. And of course, there was the end of that. And my father was left alone. They wouldn't take him at that point. But a year later, he had another heart attack, and he called the cousins we had in Paris, and they tried to get him to the hospital, but didn't get him there in time because they wouldn't take a taxi, having to wear a Jewish star. So they walked him from the apartment to the hospital. But by the time they got to the hospital, he was gone. So that's when we found out, you know, but we found all this out later on in Switzerland, because in Switzerland, the Red Cross kind of took over the communication if you wanted to find out what happened in a different country. And at the Red Cross, they'd notified us eventually what happened to our parents.
And what eventually happened? What eventually happened to your mother?
My mother was taken to a camp called Drancy, Drancy, in Paris, as part of what they call a raffle. And they had thousands of people there. And on a periodic basis, they pulled up a train and took people to Germany. And eventually, she got taken to Auschwitz. And of course, she never came back.
Was this the date of the Valdiv roundup?
Yes.
That was the big roundup, yeah?
There was a big roundup.
Okay. Now you were living with these different families, different houses in a farm and different places. Do you have memories of all those different places?
No. No, I mean, it was nice. You know, we were always, the three brothers were always together. But I wouldn't know the town or the people. You know, it was just too far back. And I think in my own mind, I chose to forget about that period of my life.
But you were well treated.
We were well treated, yes. I don't remember ever going hungry, you know. And like I said, the three brothers were always together, which was, we felt some kind of security.
So now you mentioned that eventually you got to Switzerland. Would you like to tell us that whole experience going from France to Switzerland and how it came about?
I really don't know where we started from in France, but we were somewhere near Paris when someone came to get us. It was a man, and he said, we're going for a ride. And he took us by train, and we must have been in the train 3-4 hours. And I think we were somewhere near Paris. And we ended up in a place called Annemasse, which is near the Swiss border, but in France, where we got off the train. And there, I am told, we were grouped with other kids, and all these details I didn't remember myself, but I found out later on from a young lady, Clara Bachmeier, who did a thesis on kids going from France to Switzerland. And for some reason, she happened to pick our group. And she named all the people in the group. There were 29 kids. And we were taken somewhere near the woods, which I assume was someplace near Switzerland, then split into 2 further groups of 15 each before some people came and actually walked us across to the Swiss border.
Through the forest.
Through the forest. We must have walked for about maybe an hour or so. And I remember my kid brother, Maurice, getting very tired, and my older brother carrying him on his shoulder. And that's how we crossed. We didn't have anything with us, no bags, no clothes, nothing. Just what we had. So, and then of course, somebody opened up the barbed wires. We passed through it and ended up in front of a guard with a gun who took us in. And we didn't know whether it was a German soldier or we just didn't know until they took us into a building to question us. And that's how we knew we were in Switzerland.
In what language did they question you?
In French.
In French.
In French, because I think everyone in our group, they were all French. And that's all we spoke. But
do you have memories of being afraid during that time? What were some feelings, if you could recall?
No, I don't think I was afraid.
And your brothers?
I really don't know. You know, one thing with my brothers, in all the years, of course, that I have known them, we never spoke about that period of time. Never. It was, they didn't want to bring it up, and it was the end of that. But, but what I also found out, the Swiss had, odd ways of either taking kids or rejecting them. And from what I learned later on, they rejected several kids for various reasons. Either they were too old, they didn't want older kids, they were more of a burden. But on the other hand, from what I found out, if you had amongst your group a family member who was younger than 6 years old, you were more likely to be accepted. And of course, my kid brother was just 6 years old at that time. So it could very well have been that because of him, we got accepted into Switzerland.
And those were the questions he was asking when he brought you in to question you?
Yeah.
Do you recall during that escape period eating? Did you have any food with you?
We didn't have food.
Were you hungry?
I don't think we were hungry. We were just scared. I know that eventually, the next day, I mean, we were placed into a building which was very basic with straw on the floor, and got nothing to eat that evening. Well, it was already past midnight, but the next morning they gave us some kind of soup, you know. So that was the first food we had, maybe 24 hours.
And so that was your first sleep also in that period of time?
It was. It was.
So tell us what happened after that day that you were allowed entrance into Switzerland.
We stayed in that, I don't know if I call it a kind of a displaced person camp, where they were sorting out people and deciding where to send them. And we stayed there about a week. And everything was very basic, no food to speak of, just liquid soup or something. And it took about a week or 10 days till they decided to ship us off someplace. And that's when we were sent off to a place called Les Chevalères in the French part of Switzerland, which was a nice home. It was a former vacation colony, for kids. And
Could you spell the name of that town, please?
Les, L-E-S, Chevalères, Chevalleys.
Thank you.
And there, of course, when we got there, we were well treated. We were given some food, and I guess we cleaned up, and there were some people there. But eventually what we found out is this was a home, a vacation area that they converted for kids like us. And it was run by a Protestant group called the Zwingli-Bund, Z-W-I-N-G-L-I. And Zwingli was a Protestant minister. And all the staff of that place were volunteers. There was a cook, there was a nurse, there were other people. And eventually, I would say there were about 50 kids in that place. And after a while, they decided that my older brother was too old for that group, so they shipped him off someplace else to another so-called home. I think we were in contact through that period. So he was okay, and we were getting accustomed to our new way of living.
What year was this now?
1943. We stayed in Switzerland from 1943 to 46.
Do you remember the other kids that were with you in this group?
Some, yes.
Did they all came from France, or did they come from other countries?
There were some kids, there were some kids from other countries. There was a kid from Yugoslavia, one from Italy, I would say mostly from France, but a few from other areas.
So the one organization that hid you in France brought you to the Swiss border, but obviously there was this Zwingli-Bund organization in Switzerland, the two separate organizations that took care of you.
Yeah, they kind of took over. And over the period of time we were there, we were placed in contact with some Jewish organization, who apparently were either giving clothes or money to help support us. And actually, it turned out to be quite pleasant.
So what were you doing there while you were there? Did you have school? Did you have organized activities?
They tried to organize some activities. They had classes, some classes. I remember an algebra class. I don't think it was very formal, but they tried to keep us busy. And what came in was a group called the French Jewish Boy Scouts. And they tried to make Boy Scouts out of us. Basically, for uniform, they gave us a scarf. And the reason we were told is that by tying up with the Boy Scouts. You get a lot of exercise, and we need to fortify you in case someday you have to run away someplace else.
So they were giving you this kind of training.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you make a new friend while you were there?
We made a lot of friends. We made a lot of friends. I have a book, which I'll show later on, with people wrote souvenir letters after we were ready to leave, you know. So it was really quite nice. And while in Switzerland, I was told first by the director that they had been contacted by the Red Cross about my mother being taken. So I knew that, you know, and we always figured we'll see her back when we get back home eventually. So we didn't worry too much about it. And then 1 year later, I think it was around 44, they told me that my father had died. And that was that. So we had nobody in Paris anymore.
That must have been a terrible shock.
It was. Because, you know, you always felt one day you're going to come home. So it didn't happen. And then I forgot about it. I mean, nothing we could do. You know, so everybody was kind of waiting till the end of the war.
And when did you find out that the war ended?
On May 8th, 1945. Because I believe that's when the armistice was signed. Everybody was screaming and yelling and being happy. How they found it, they must have been told. I don't know whether it was a radio that gave the news, and of course, once the news was given, everybody's making plans, where they're gonna go, how they're gonna get back home, you know, and that's when the Red Cross came in to help sorting out the exit out of Switzerland.
So some kids knew that they had a home to go back to,
Yes.
but you knew that you didn't.
Exactly. Well,
And
we had two choices, actually. We had these cousins in Paris who were French citizens. So when the Red Cross came, they say, you have relatives in Paris, and you also have relatives in the United States. You know, and the Red Cross had been in touch with my aunt in the United States, telling her where we were. And so that's what they proposed to us. Oh, the other thing they proposed, they say, you also have a choice to go to Israel. Israel will take you in, educate you, and take care of you. And they had a program for kids, you know, and they wanted, of course, more people to go there. So that was our choice.
oh, so they gave you that choice.
Yes.
And so did the three of you get together? Do you remember making that decision?
Yeah, we got together, or we spoke together, and we knew that the cousins in Paris, really, it would have been very difficult for them to take us in because they really didn't have the room or the means to do it. So we chose to go to the United States if they would have us. And that's when we started establishing a contact with my aunt in New York.
Okay. And how did you communicate? Through letters, through telegraphs?
If I remember correctly, it was always through the Red Cross in the beginning. I don't think I ever received a letter from my aunt in the United States. And of course, later on, I found out that the only thing she could write was Yiddish, and I couldn't read it. So that would have been useless. But
she would,
but somehow she was made aware of what we wanted to do. And from her side, she was only too willing to save her sister's 3 kids. And so a whole process started, to try to get visas and get her approved and so on.
And who helped you with all the paperwork on the Swiss side?
The people there. I mean, they just didn't drop you after the war. They stayed until you definitely had someplace to go.
Okay.
And
then once the decision was taken and once all the paperwork was done, how did you get to the United States?
I believe that my aunt in New York bought the tickets for us to come to the U.S. And also she had to get special visas because basically me and my brother were Polish. My younger brother was French, but we had no passport. And you needed some kind of visa to come to the United States. So my aunt, who was a real wheeler dealer, managed to get special law passed in Congress to obtain visas for the 3 of us. And so she got the visa, she got the money for the passport, for the plane trip, and so off we went.
So you flew to the United States from where? From Switzerland?
No. The problem was that in those days, most flights to the United States was from Lisbon on a Pan American Clipper. The planes that used to go on the water and off the water. And the problem with that is, first of all, it was in Lisbon, but secondly, it was so crowded, they had no seats. But we were put on a train from Switzerland all the way down to Lisbon to wait for the plane and to wait for space. And I think some Jewish organization put us with a family in Lisbon who had a very big apartment, and we stayed there for a week. It was very pleasant. The people were wonderful. And we ended up getting on a plane and coming to New York.
How old were you at this moment?
I was 14.
So that must have been quite the experience for the 3 of you, flying in a plane for the first time.
Yeah. I just want to backtrack a little bit. What I didn't mention is that several months before I left Switzerland, they made me have a bar mitzvah. Some Jewish community in the town of St. Gallen organized it, and I was able to read from the Torah, and I got my watch, my pen, and so that was my parting shot from Switzerland.
So you had a bar mitzvah. That's
I had a bar mitzvah.
a bar mitzvah in Switzerland. And this was the Jewish community in St. Gallen
St. Gallen.
that organized that.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's right. So then following that, you flew to the United States.
We flew to
And was that a non-stop flight from Lisbon to New York?
Lisbon to LaGuardia. Yes. Non-stop. I think
Non-stop.
it stopped in Newfoundland. It had one stop, but we didn't get off the plane.
Okay, so you did stop in Newfoundland. Right, right. Okay. And so do you recall the meeting with your aunt at the airport?
Oh, yes. How can I forget? Well, we got off the plane, and there was my aunt and uncle, whom I didn't really recognize, but then I surmised that it was them, with some friends that they had brought along because one of their friends spoke French. And so we could establish, let's say, immediate communication, because otherwise it would have been difficult. Also,
By this time, you've probably forgot Yiddish, huh?
I knew some Yiddish because eventually that's the only way we could communicate with my aunt and uncle. They, of course, didn't speak French. So they spoke English. They'd been here several years. But, and off we went. The friends they brought had a car. And so we went to, we got in the car and went home.
And their home was in?
Their home, they had an apartment in Harlem, New York.
Up in, Harlem. Mm-hmm.
And the reason they had an apartment in Harlem is because they owned a little grocery in the neighborhood. And that's how they made a living and managed to save enough money to send for us. But,
and what are their names? What were their names?
her name was Rivka or Rebecca, and his name was Benjamin.
And their family name?
Salkfas, Salcfas.
Okay. Now you mentioned, I just want to backtrack a little bit. You mentioned, I'm trying to get the different organizations that helped you. There was an organization in France that helped hide you, right?
Yes.
Then they brought you to Switzerland, and there was an organization in Switzerland that took care of you for the next few years, right?
Yes.
And then you mentioned the Red Cross. The Red Cross was helping you?
Was involved. But the main organization in Europe that took care of our travel need was HIAS, H-I-A-S, which is the Hebrew Association something. And they were excellent in, let's say, placing us from Switzerland down to Lisbon and placing us with this family.
So HIAS helped you in Lisbon?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now you're in New York. Now you met your aunt and uncle who
Right.
are going to become your new family. What are your memories of the first few months, the first experiences
Well,
with English?
English, of course, was difficult because we just didn't speak one word, you know. So, as I said before, the only thing we could do is they spoke in Yiddish to us, and even though we couldn't speak, we could kind of answer, and I think we got along reasonably well. You know, my kid brother, who at that point was 9 years old, it was a beautiful kid. They loved him. They never had any children, and suddenly to have 3 children in the house was a big deal. But they were very gracious. The first week we were there, they took us to a big department store in New York and bought us clothes, suits, and ties and shoes, and the whole bit. You know, I mean, I have pictures which I'll show later.
Wonderful.
You
Yeah.
know. So they were really trying very hard to please us. You know.
And did you start school? Did they register you for school?
Not right away. I remember at the beginning, we didn't have anything to do, so we went down to the store and stayed there for a few hours. You know, and then came back home, and we kind of found our way to go back and forth. We couldn't register for school because we didn't speak English. And then finally, my aunt decided that we needed to go to school, and the only one that would accept us was a yeshiva in the other part of the Bronx. So we started going to yeshiva, which of course was not only English, but also was religious education, you know, which we basically didn't like. Not only that, but eventually I found out, I mean, we knew what was going on. The yeshiva was going to use us for fundraising, put us up on a stage. Hey, we saved those poor refugees. We're giving them an education. And I kind of said, the hell with that. And I told my aunt, I don't want to be a showpiece. And she took us out of the yeshiva, which was a good thing. But my aunt was very resourceful. She had a cousin who was a school teacher in the New York school system. And somehow she arranged to put us in PS 54 in Manhattan because that teacher was able to fudge the papers. Because in New York, you have to live in the neighborhood to be able to go to the specific school. And of course, we didn't live in that neighborhood, but it worked out. So that's how I started my public education. I believe it was in 7th grade or something like that, you know. And
your other 2 brothers too?
Yes. And there basically we learned English. I mean, they knew we were foreigners, and they kind of took care of us. But I think by that time, it was already 4 or 5 months, and we could understand. So it was fine, you know. And so what we did is from public school, we were already in 9th, 10th grade, we went directly into high school. And that was, besides that initial public school, that was my first formal schooling here in the United States. And I remember going to Theodore Roosevelt High School on Fordham Road in the Bronx, where I stayed for 4 years and graduated.
And how did you do in academics? Your English was up to speed by that time?
My English was medium, but I could follow. And the quality of the student body in that neighborhood wasn't that great. So I came out to be a startling pupil. I was able to join the Arista, which is an honor society. Actually, I did well in high school. And the teachers all helped me. You know, they were very friendly. And by that time, I spoke English pretty well.
Did you make a lot of friends in high school?
No, I was pretty withdrawn because I learned from Paris, if you're not noticed, they're not going to bother you. So I tried not to be noticeable, which isn't the greatest thing in school because they want you to talk, you know. But anyhow, I did manage to graduate high school. And so did my brothers.
And so they also did well in school?
They graduated. I don't know how well they did, but
after high school, tell us a little bit about your further higher education.
Well, after high school, I decided I wanted to go to college. And I remember discussing it with my aunt, and she said, "College for what? You know, you can work in the store." Because that's what my older brother started doing. He started working in the store. And that was good for them. You know, by that time he was already 17. But anyhow, I spoke to some advisors in high school, and they helped me apply to City College in New York, which at that time was free if you lived in New York. And that's where I went. Now,
can you tell us a little more about another event that took place between you and your new family?
Another event?
Yeah, what was eventually the relationship was not just aunt and uncle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they, I forgot about that. Shortly after we arrived, they said, "We want to adopt you." And we said, "What?" But anyhow, they had a friendly family lawyer, and he made out all the papers. We had arrived in the United States in February, and they filed the adoption paper in September of the same year for all three of us. And so that's how we changed the name. And
that,
and the reason my aunt said they wanted to have their own sons is so that somebody would be able to say Shiva for them, since they had no kids. That was important for them.
So they kept a religious home?
Yes. They tried. We messed them up several times because they had separate dishes for milk dishes and meat dishes. And then they had to also change dishes for Passover. You know, so that was no fun. but no, she tried to be religious. She belonged to a temple, and she was the president of the First Ladies Warsaw Society on Rivington Street, which is the Jewish section of Manhattan.
Mm.
So, yeah, and most of her friends I know, or the people that she dealt with, she spoke only in Yiddish. I don't think my aunt could write in English, actually. Because afterwards, when we had to do some things with paperwork, she always took me with her to read it and make sure she signed properly.
Wonderful. So getting back to your education, you went to City College. What did you study?
Well, I majored in international trade. And I came out with a Bachelor of Business Administration with a major in foreign trade. And the reason I did this is because I figured I don't speak English so well. I got to have some pluses to help me earn a living. And I always felt that if I kept up with my French and used my French together with my college education, I would be ahead of other people, which it did help me quite a bit to get into the business world.
So when you graduated with this degree, did you get a job afterwards?
Not right away. I got several jobs. I think in the first 2 years, I had 7 jobs. But there's something on the computer. Okay. No, I had several jobs and I didn't like it. In the meantime, I got married, but we can talk about that separately. And eventually I did connect very well with a company that I stayed with for over 30 years and ended up in, I would say, reasonable shape.
So you mentioned you got married. Tell us about that.
I got married. Well, after I finished college, while I was in college, they were drafting people. I think it was the Vietnam War. Korea. And I had been drafted while I was in college, and they deferred me until I graduated. And the day after I graduated, they took me in. So I went in the Army, and I did my 2 years. But while in the Army, I was stationed on the Governor's Island in New York City. And one Saturday, a buddy of mine and I, we had nothing to do. We had no money. We're poor soldiers. So I said, let's go into New York. And they had USO booth, which could give you direction where the restaurants could give you a free meal, possibly shows. And they directed us to the basement of a temple on 72nd Street, who converted their basement into a nightclub for soldiers, and they had a nice spread of food. They had young ladies to dance with. They had a band. And and the second girl I asked to dance, well, to make a long story short, I ended up marrying her. It was very quick. She was 17 at the time. I think I met her in September. We got engaged in November for my birthday, and we were married the following May while I was still in service. Her mother,
What was her name?
Eileen, Eileen.
And her maiden name?
Kerman, Kerman.
So you got married and then went back into the service.
I was still in the service while I got married,
Ah, yeah.
you know, but eventually, of course, I got discharged, and we got an apartment in New York with my wife, and that's where I started my life, my married life.
And tell us a little bit about your children.
My children, I had two boys. One boy, my older boy, is now 65, and he lives here in Tucson. He just retired from being a chef. He worked in various places for several years, but he had I would say, a nice career, but somehow didn't marry till late. He got married 15, 17 years ago. And so he lives in Tucson, not far from here, with his wife. And my youngest son, who was born 2 years earlier or later, he went to school, and from day one, he wanted to go into the arts. He joined all the drama clubs. He went to college, and he made a career in the business end of show business. And he ended up being vice president of international licensing for a company that bought up musicals and resold them or licensed them overseas to various schools, countries, and it was his dream job, because he could travel. He never got married, but unfortunately, he died when he was 57, about 15 years ago. Just dropped dead of a heart attack. But
sorry.
Yeah.
What were their names?
My oldest one is Larry Lawrence, and my youngest one was Richard. Richard.
And Richard lived in New York?
He lived in New York. He had a nice apartment in Chelsea. I don't know if you know New York. And he loved it. That was his life. And of course, we liked it too because we always had an apartment in New York to come to. So that was very pleasant.
When did you settle in Tucson?
We came to Tucson in 94, which is when I retired.
So during the time that you were working, where were you living?
In New Jersey, for the most part. We had a home. We had a home in Essex County in New Jersey for 26 years. And then I was shipped overseas with my job. So we sold the house and we moved. I mean, ironically enough, I got moved back to Paris for the last 4 years of my career. And that was very nice, actually.
And tell us a little bit about the company you worked for and what you did.
Well, the company I worked for was a chemical conglomerate involved in various chemicals for cosmetics, for textiles, to lubricate glass. It was really an excellent business, and my job was to expand the international operation. And from day one, that's exactly what I did. I appointed several agents. I opened 2 new offices, one in England, one in Germany. And of course, by the end of my career, some French companies decided they wanted to buy my division, which was the international group that I was general manager of. And so they packed me up and shipped me to Paris. And that's where I finished my career.
What's the name of this company?
It's now known as Total, Total. They're really a petrochemical company with various divisions all over the world. It's a big company. So that was a nice career end. And
so you retired and decided to come to Tucson.
Came to Tucson in '94 and lived in northern Tucson in a place called Saddlebrook for 26 years. After which my wife didn't feel so good. I wasn't doing so well, so we decided to move to Hacienda. That's when we moved here about 4 years ago.
And you said your wife wasn't feeling so good?
No, she died 2 years ago. We were married 67 years.
Well, we're going to switch gears now. I'm going to ask some different kinds of questions.
Sure.
Do you need a break?
Yeah, just to take some water.
Okay. Take your time.
It's okay.
So, aside from this interview, have you ever been involved at all in any kind of Holocaust-related activities, organizations, or anything like that?
The answer is no, and a very conscious no, because I tried to forget, and I felt that being involved would keep bringing the thing up, which it would. But I just couldn't face it until the time I decided to write my little book and put it down in writing. And that's why I don't want to know about Auschwitz. People go there. I would never go there.
Tell us about your book. How long ago did you publish it?
Well, it was published a couple months in January of this year, but I had written it, most of it, about 10 years ago, and I did it myself. I didn't have it published, and so I put it in writing, and I sent it to all my nieces and nephew, and they found it very useful for their background. Because, for example, my brother's kids, my brother had 4 children, okay? And because of where they lived, they ended up going to parochial school, Catholic parochial school. So they all became Catholic, but they knew they had a Jewish father. And so my book helped them bring back some of their background, and they loved it. And I never really said anything to my brother. That's what they wanted to do, and it was fine. You know, my brother wasn't religious, but and it's kind of worked out, I would say.
And did your son also read your book?
Yes. Yes.
And he has children too?
My son, neither one of them have children.
But your son read the book.
Yeah.
Did that cause any discussion between the two of you?
Well,
any conversations as a result?
Yes. My youngest son was very interested. He loved it. He actually distributed to his boss and everybody else in his office. So there was a lot of interest from my youngest son. My oldest son, not so much. You know, he just blew it off, is the best way I can say it. I don't think he asked me any questions at all. You know, and when I finally had it published, I gave him a copy, and I think he read it. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Going back to discrimination, and have you ever in the United States had any experience with discrimination or anti-Semitism in the United States or anywhere else you traveled for work?
Yeah. I mean, one blatant example is a colleague of mine and myself. We had made an appointment with a big company, which I shall not mention by name, in Chicago, and we went there for a business call, and we did our thing. We made our presentation. Everything went well, except through the back door. We later found out after we left that the guy I interviewed said, "I will never buy from these people because they're Jews." And it's the only time I had an overt situation like this. And so we just plumb forgot these people and said, "It's your loss."
But other than that, you never had any issues in the United States?
No, never.
And because of your experiences during the Holocaust and during that period of time, did you ever get any psychological counseling later on?
No, I thought about it, but when I wanted it, I couldn't afford it. I remember they told me $125 an hour, and I didn't have any insurance at the time, so I said, forget it. So I didn't. I tried to learn to adjust myself, because it would have been useful. And the way I felt is, and I read about people coming from overseas through various organizations. And the first thing they do when they hit the United States, they give them counseling, you know. And I thought, boy, that would have been nice, except that we didn't come to any organization since my aunt paid for the ticket. So this was not available to us. But I could have used some boosting in my self-esteem at some point in time until I decided, screw everybody else and I'll do what I have to do. So, you know, I kind of asserted myself.
So you basically counseled yourself.
Yes. I don't think
and that was the reason you thought that counseling would help you.
Yeah.
Going back to your reflections on the Holocaust, why did it take you 60 years to publish your story, to write your story about your Holocaust journey?
Well, basically because having lost both parents within a short period of time, that's really the thing that kind of stuck in my mind, you know, my loss. And with the loss came the hurt. And so for years I couldn't approach it because it hurt too much. And then I decided, for the good of the future and my nieces and nephew and my brothers that weren't going to do anything, I said, I better start doing it. And I started putting things down on paper. But that was the reason. It was just hurting too much to do it. And I guess I overcame that part.
And likewise, what prompted you to want to be interviewed by the Shoah Foundation?
Well, because that's another step in the right direction, especially when I found out that there's still 30% of the U.S. population who deny that there ever has been a Holocaust. And people have to know what has happened. It's very important. And I felt if I could contribute to that effort, it would be positive. And that's why I did it. And also, over the years, I've learned to speak and express myself a little bit more than I did years ago. So it was easier to do it now than 15, 20 years ago. I couldn't have done it.
So when you finally wrote your story, you told your children about it, what were their reactions?
I got no reaction to speak of, from what I recall. You know, I mean, by that time, they had their lives. They were involved in school and clubs, and I wasn't that important. I mean, I was a parent, but that's it. You know.
So now, you were a teenager, young child, and then a teenager during the war years, so you didn't necessarily know all the history around you. But when you wrote your book, you did some research. You want to tell us a little bit about the research you did to fill in the gaps?
Well, the basic research, I wanted to put in a little bit of history to start the book, and I did a lot of research about what went on in Poland at the time, the time frame, and I tried to find a rationale for my parents coming to Paris, and I did find it. I did a lot of work online to research it, and that's about it.
You found out about OSU.
Yeah, and I, of course, by going online, I found out about the organizations that theoretically took care of us that we didn't know about, like OSE, Œuvre de Secours in France, and they were quite active in saving kids. And
Yeah.
so that was, I thought, a wonderful thing, and it explained also who took care of us and pushed us from one place to the other. Because
Yes.
I didn't know what was going on when I was 10, 11 years old. People tell me to go someplace, I go.
Yeah. No, that was very important to be able to name these organizations. I mean, you basically attribute your survival to these organizations.
Oh, absolutely. It was I think I was lucky. It was a touch and go situation, could have gone anyway. But I guess I was fortunate.
Would you like to take a drink now?
Yes.
So now again, reflecting on your experience retroactively, what effect do you think that the Holocaust had or has had on your faith, on your belief, or on your behaviors?
I don't quite get that. Can you hear me? She can't hear me.
You didn't hear my question?
No, can you repeat it?
Surely. What effect do you think that the Holocaust has had on your faith, your beliefs, or your behaviors?
Well, that's a difficult question. What it really did to me personally, it made me stronger, and you learn to depend on yourself and not so much on other people. And if you want things done, you do it yourself. So it reinforced the direction in which I had to go to be successful, for example, and I think it worked pretty well, because I always told my brothers they should have gone to school, and they could have, but they didn't, and as a result, they had a pretty rough time during their lifetime. I mean, not that I had it easy, but it was easier for me than for them.
Did you ever have, or do you still have, nightmares
And pardon?
related to your Holocaust experiences?
Nightmares.
What?
Nightmares.
Oh, nightmares? No, not at all. I think we're disconnected.
Now, clearly, okay. Uh, Joseph, could you stop for a moment? Stop the camera.
Yes.
You're gonna roll again.
Okay. We are rolling.
Okay, Bernard. Clearly, the last 6 months have changed many lives. But what are your thoughts about the state of Israel?
Well, I think the state of Israel is, from the beginning, from day one, I thought it was a wonderful thing to finally have a place where you wouldn't have any anti-Semitism or problems or, and I feel very strongly that it's a positive thing to have Israel. And of course, now they're having their problems, which one way or the other are going to have to be resolved. But I've been to Israel several times, and I really like it, and if I had had my choice to go to Israel when I was younger, I might have been there now. It would have been a different life for me. But at the time, I was willing to do it.
Do you have any relatives in Israel?
Yes. I have some French cousins who felt that French anti-Semitism was so strong, they decided to move to Israel. So,
Recently, not after the war, recently.
In the last 3 years, there's been a movement of something like 5,000 French Jewish people moving to Israel. So I think it's a wonderful country, but they've got their problems.
How has the Holocaust affected your Jewish identity?
Well, I will never deny the fact that I'm Jewish. I may not be religious, but I'm very strongly Jewish, so that's my identity. And
you still do not have any affiliation with a synagogue or any Jewish organization?
No, I don't.
Do you celebrate any Jewish holidays?
Yeah. I mean, we celebrate in terms, they sometimes have a Passover service here, and we go down. I go to temple every so often, but not on a regular basis.
Do you think that your Holocaust experiences affected how you raised your children?
I don't think so, but I don't know. because you don't know certain behaviors, which I certainly acquired when I was a child, got to have been reflected on my kids. But I mean, I tried to give them everything I didn't have. And that's perhaps a flaw because you overdo it. And that's not great. I found out later on. No, I mean, basically, my attitude was that I would give my wife and my kids everything that I couldn't have myself. And that was very strong. And pretty well, I mean, now that I'm 91, I've accomplished that. You know, maybe not necessarily everything I wanted them to do, but then they have their own mind too.
Do you, or have you in the past or in the present, do you read books or watch movies about the Holocaust?
I try not to. I don't like to watch them. I don't think it would benefit me, and I feel it would still hurt to watch. I mean, there would be no purpose in me doing that.
In the 60s, 61, 62, 1962, did you follow the Eichmann trials?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then later on, the trial of John Demjanjuk?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I always felt, especially with Eichmann, that's where Israel was at its best, when it took care of German people hiding, you know, in Argentina and other countries.
And while you watched it and watched the testimonies, how did you feel?
I was glad that it was being done. I was glad they finally caught somebody. And as far as Demjanjuk, all I can say, he was a character, you know, and you know, I believe, I mean, that's my belief based on what I've read, that he did all the things he did.
Yeah.
But
no, did you ever apply for restitution from the claims conference?
I don't know at this point what the claims conference is. Okay? I did file a claim through an attorney years and years ago, and nothing much came out of it. Why, I don't know. The only restitution I got was I was able to get $25,000 for each of my brothers and I from the French government. And this was in direct admission that they were involved in deporting my mother. You know, because they use French trains to move the people. So beyond that, I never really looked for anything more.
Now you said that you were sent to Paris later in your career to work in Paris. Was that the first time you returned to Paris after you left
No.
Europe?
I've been to Paris almost hundreds of times because in my business, I had a big business in France. And so every other month I was in Paris. So I've been back and forth pretty well.
Were you curious to see your old home? Was that something you did on any of your visits?
Yes, I went back several times because the last apartment we had was at 21 Rue du Temple, which is not far from the Marais, so you can actually walk. And oddly enough, the last time I was there, they had taken the 3 buildings, including the building I lived in, and in front of it, it made it a pedestrian walk with a park, with flowers and benches for people to sit down. So I kind of call this the memorial to my parents. And, and right across the street is a hat shop of all things, which is ironic because my parents made hats. That was their trade. So I enjoy going back to Paris. I actually feel at home.
Did you try to go into your old home, into your apartment?
I did before, several times actually. And over the years, you know, in France, the apartments are controlled by the concierge, which is superintendent. And many years ago, I went in there and questioned her about my father's factory and what happened to it. And she shooed me off and wouldn't talk about it. So I didn't get any place. And since then, they've replaced her. She's gone. So it's no use going in there just to see the old apartment, you know. So.
Did that was that an emotional experience for you to see your apartment the first time?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't occupied. It was totally empty because they had emptied it. You know, but that goes back many years today. It's probably occupied, I would think.
And who went with you on your first earliest trips to
My
Paris?
first trip was my wife went with me. It was 1961. So it was several years after the war, of course.
And then later on, did your sons ever join you there?
No. No. My youngest son was in Paris, but he had no interest in seeing where I used to live.
So we're coming on to the end of the interview, and tell us again why you wanted to share your story with us today.
Well, the major reason is that I wanted to be able to show that with determination, you can overcome some of the things that have happened in your life. And in my case, I consider the period that I was in France and was really, you know, my bad period. And by, going through my life here in the United States, I've put it back on track. And it can be done, but it takes a lot of doing and a lot of willpower. And somehow I felt I had more willpower than my two brothers, who just let things go. And I mean, they did okay, but the problem is they're both gone and I'm still here. My older brother died. He was 70 years old. And my younger brother died last year. And he was 87. So he lived a reasonable life.
Do you think that your older brother died fairly young because of health issues from the Holocaust? Is that possible?
No, my older brother, well, I never determined whether the source of my father's heart problems, whether it was congenital or what. But as it turns out, my older brother had heart problems. We always figure, well, our father had heart problems, so he did too. And I ended up by having heart problems. But the problem with my brother is he also had diabetes. And the two combined, plus the fact that he smoked for many years, didn't help. So that's why I think he died young. Had he chosen not to smoke, maybe chose a different life, he may still be here, I don't know.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the story that you feel I didn't ask you or you didn't mention? Would you like to add anything?
No, I think you've been pretty thorough. I've really gone through my whole life,
Yeah.
Which is not always that easy to do. But I'm glad I was able to do it.
We always ask our interviewees, what message would you like to tell future generations?
Well, the major message would be that if something occurs that is contrary to your beliefs, or you can definitely say is wrong, don't let it go by. You've got to fight it every time it happens. Just like you can't let rampant anti-Semitism continue because it's just going to go into something else. And that's the nature of people. And there's always somebody who's going to blame the Jews for their problems. And so you've got a problem, try to resolve it by bringing attention to it.
Do you think the Holocaust could happen again?
Yes. I think it could happen again, and it all starts with dictatorships, for people who think they want to be dictators. I think we've got similar situations in some African countries today. And so the answer is absolutely. And that's what we've got to watch out for. And not condone the deniers, and just let it go. They've got to be shown and told the truth of what we know happened because we were there.
And now they'll have your testimony
And
as part of the proof.
good. I'm glad.
And for this we thank you, Bernard Salvas.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
We're cutting.
Joseph?
Yeah,
Okay.
cutting camera. Do you want to see what's on the table? Is that? Do you need to see what the pictures he's putting down?
We can't hear you.
Sorry, you mute. We can't.
Sorry, I forgot. If you can allow me to see it, that would be great. But if it's going to mess things up for you, then
Can you see the table?
fine. I can see it. Yeah, very well.
There it is. All right.
Okay,
She
perfect.
can?
Yes, you can. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no problem. It's good.
Okay. All right.
Sounds good.
Sound is speeding. Camera is also speeding. And then on final. Okay. All right. You're free to start whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. This
Bernard, you've brought us some photos to show.
yes.
Please tell us about this photo that you've brought.
Well, this one is my mother when she was 16 years old. And it's very old. I think it's a beautiful picture. So I wanted to start off with her picture.
Please tell us her name.
Her name is Pessa Mendelssohn, maiden name. And, I think she looks like me. But
And how did you acquire this photo?
This photo I got from my aunt when we came to the States. She had accumulated several photos from the family, and that's how I got it.
Okay, beautiful. It's a wonderful memory.
So that's and the next one is it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you see it this way? Or up?
Yeah, up.
This
Pull it down a little bit. A little bit more. So the closer it is to you, the better I can see it. Perfect.
okay. Now this little guy is about almost 2 years old, and that's me in the Jardin des Tuileries
In Paris.
in Paris.
And these are all photos that your aunt had
Yes.
when you came to America.
Yes. Now this, can you see it?
I can see the top half there. So if you want to see the whole of it, you can shift it.
No, this is my father and mother, and me being held by my father and my brother Jerry. Here again in Paris in 1933. I was 8 months old.
And tell us your father's name again.
Chaim, or Charles. And this little picture was 2.5 years old. Okay. Oh. Now this picture is my father in the middle, and on his left is my aunt, Rivka, from the U.S., when she came to visit us in Paris.
What year was that?
That was 1935.
Uh-huh.
I was about 2 years old. My brother must have been about 3. So it was always big celebration when my aunt from America came. And
Tell us, what was the reason that she immigrated to the United States so early?
I don't know the real reason. Of course, she had just married a Polish guy called Benjamin, and they were trying to set up a little business in the United States so she could bring over her parents, which she eventually did. And so whenever she came to Paris, it was always, big celebration.
Wonderful.
And this is another small picture of my brother and I, where we pose with our Mickey Mouse toys.
What year is this?
This was, I was about 4 years old. So it was 36. Now, after we came to the United States, I told you we went to S. Klein's, the department store in New York, and this is the result with our new suits, my uncle, aunt, and my brothers. Can you see that?
And this is the uncle and aunt who eventually adopted you, so they became your new parents. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, they eventually adopted me, and this is actually the adoption papers. And the reason I'm showing it is they used a relative lawyer of the family. His name was Mendelssohn. And of course, my mother's maiden name was Mendelssohn. And he didn't believe in having a staff. So he wrote out everything by hand. And this is the adoption paper that he wrote out in September of the year that we arrived.
And that was 46?
46.
Yeah.
September 46. And then in 1955, when I got married, that was my wedding picture.
And tell us the name of your wife.
My wife's name was Eileen. She had a sister, an older sister, which became a problem because usually it's the older sister that should be married and not the younger one. So there was a lot of fighting between the two sisters. But anyhow, we got married, and like I think I said, we had been married 67 years. And this is my 2 brothers at my wedding.
Tell us the names of your brothers.
Jerry, myself, and Maurice. And this is Eileen's extended family. That's her mother, her grandmother, and the grandmother from the other side, her brother and sister.
And what was the family name?
Kerman. Kerman. And her mother, being a widow, had saved $2,000 so she could make a wedding for her daughter. That was it. And after we got married, this are 2 boys. Larry on the side with all his head, And Richard, he was a redhead when he was born. And of course, we lived in New Jersey, so we always ended up at the beach. And this is my two boys and I at Seaside Heights in New Jersey. One of the boys was a collector. He collected rocks and anything he could find on the beach. And the little guy couldn't give a damn about collection. All he wanted to make friends. So he was all over the place. And this is the announcement when my son died in 2016. There was the announcement that his company put out in the trade paper.
What trade was your son in?
Show business.
All right.
This is a picture that we took when I got the three brothers together in California. And it's 2 years before my older brother died. And I had sent a ticket to my kid brother who lived in Jersey to meet us in Arizona. Then we drove to see my older brother in California. And we had this reunion. We all decided to put on Western hats. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And finally, this is Bernie at peace with Sparky, my little doggy. He could always sleep in my lap. He was wonderful.
Wonderful. That's it, Bernard.
That's it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your testimony and sharing your family and your history with us. It's now recorded.
Well, thank you very much.
And will be available.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Got it.